Welcome to our third panel devoted to colonial narratives about Eastern and Central Europe. It's my pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Anna Damięcka-Wójcik from the University of Warsaw. She is a Germanist. In 2021, she published her first book on identity as process from Johannes Bobrowski to post-German discourse. This notion of the post-German. Po-niemieckie is also in the center of her present second book project about the way how Polish resettlers dealt with German material culture in the area of Masuren. Today she will be talking about Orientalisierung der Masuren als ethnische Gruppe, eine Studie zur Wahrnehmung des Anderen im 19. Jahrhundert in Preußen. Dr. Damięcka-Wójcik, we are looking forward to your presentation.
Danke für die Vorstellung und auch ich möchte mich herzlich für die Einladung bedanken und dafür, dass ich hier den Vortrag Orientalisierung der Masuren als ethnische Gruppe, eine Studie zur Wahrnehmung des Anderen im 19. Jahrhundert in Preußen vorstellen kann. Der heutige Vortrag des Referats stützt sich auf Teilergebnisse meines größeren Forschungsprojekts unter dem Titel Lebenswege masurischer Familien in Deutschland und in Polen. Im Zentrum meiner Forschung steht also eine Minderheit, die sowohl von Deutschen als auch von Polen als ihre Minderheit betrachtet wird. Mitte des 19. Jahrhunderts zählte man laut kirchlichen Statistiken fast 300.000 polnischsprachige Evangelische in Ostpreußen, also Masuren. Sie stellten etwa 16% der Bevölkerung dar und besiedelten vor allem die südlichen Landkreise Ostpreußens. Nach 1945 wanderten die meisten Masuren als Spätaussiedler nach Deutschland aus. Laut der letzten Volkszählung in Polen 2021 bekennen sich heute noch etwa 1400 Personen zur masurischen Identifikation. In diese vielschichtige kulturelle Identität führt uns ein bekanntes Zitat von Adolf Szymański ein. Was den Masuren kennzeichnet, ist in der Hauptsache seine polnische Abstammung und seine deutsche Schulung, seine slawischen Sitten und Gewohnheiten und seine deutsche Tradition, sein polnischer Familienname und sein deutscher Vorname, seine polnische Sprache und seine deutsche Schrift, das polnische Sprichwort und das deutsche Lied, die slawische Religiosität und die evangelische Konfession. Nicht nur geografisch und historisch, sondern auch sprachlich, sozial, religiös und ethnografisch sind die Masuren klar definierbar. Geografisch, sie bewohnten den südlichen Teil Ostpreußens, angrenzend an Masowien, auch Masau im Mittelalter genannt. Historisch, ihre Einwanderung aus Masowien nach Preußen ist ab dem 15. Jahrhundert belegt, also Deutschordenstaat. Sprachlich. Schriftlich bedienten sich die Masuren der polnischen Sprache, jedoch gedruckt mit gothischen Lettern, also sehr unikal. Meist wurden sie in preußischen Schulen bis 1871 auf Polnisch unterrichtet. Sie sprachen einen masurischen Dialekt, der sich durch Sprachkontakte mit dem Deutschen auf der Grundlage des Altpolnischen entwickelte. Sozial als ländliche Bevölkerung war ihr sozialer Aufstieg an das Deutschtum gebunden. Sie waren konservativ und loyal zum Staat, was sich 1920 in der Volksabstimmung zeigte, bei der 97,5% der Masuren für Preußen stimmten. Religiös, sie waren die ersten Kinder der Reformation. Als lutherische Evangeliker konnten sie durch das Postulat, ihre Religion in der eigenen Sprache zu bekennen, über Jahrhunderte ihre Eigenart bewahren. Ethnografisch, die Floskel, wo sich aufhört die Kultur, da sich anfängt der Masur, zeigt, dass diese ethnische Gruppe als wenig attraktiv wahrgenommen wurde, was oft zur schnellen Flucht aus dieser Identität in die bessere Deutsche führte. Mit diesem Vorurteil befinden wir uns bereits in einer kolonialen Perspektive. Subaltern Studies und postkoloniale Studien eröffnen neue Ansätze für die Analyse der Wahrnehmung der Masuren im 19. Jahrhundert. Besonders aufschlussreich ist hierbei das Konzept des Orientalismus, wie es von Edward Said 1978 formuliert und später von Larry Wolff in seinem bekannten Werk Inventing Eastern Europe erweitert wurde. Es geht hier um Orient im erweiterten Kulturverständnis, also Orient als Osten, der exotisch, andersartig, wild ist und zivilisiert werden muss. Der Maßstab wird aber im Westen festgesetzt. Wolff analysierte die Berichte westlicher Reisender, die von Berlin über Polen nach Russland reisten. Für diese Reisenden bedeutete das Verlassen Berlins den Eintritt in eine neue Zivilisation, die sie durch ihren orientalischen Kontrast faszinierte. Wolffs Konzept der Erfindung Osteuropas durch westliche Reisende in der Aufklärung spiegelt sich auch in den Reiseberichten über Masuren im 19. Jahrhundert. Als Philologin habe ich 2 Primärtexte gelesen zur Kunde Masurens von Oldenberg 1865 und Reise nach Preußen von Grabowski 1859. Der Manuskript von Oldenberg befindet sich im Evangelischen Zentralarchiv in Berlin und wurde in den Jahren 2000 und 2001 parallel in der polnischen und deutschen Sprache veröffentlicht. Der Text von Grabowski hat auch 3 Veröffentlichungen, Originalfassung verlegt in Paris 1895, dann zum zweiten Mal in der Nachkriegszeit, aber zensiert und vor 3 Jahren in einer Serie der Masurianer. Beide Autoren reisten etwa zur gleichen Zeit nach Preußen, um die polnischsprachige Bevölkerung kennenzulernen. Grabowski 1844, Oldenberg 1865, also 21 Jahre später. Grabowski unternahm eine Privatreise aus Warschau nach Preußen. Oldenberg wurde dienstlich von der Zentrale der Evangelischen Kirche aus Berlin nach Ostpreußen entsandt. Beide traten zum ersten Mal mit der masurischen Bevölkerung in Kontakt. Daher präsentieren sie eine äußere Beobachterperspektive, jedoch aus unterschiedlichen Blickwinkeln, dem polnischen und dem deutschen. Heute gelesen stellen ihre Berichte nicht nur eine Studie über die soziale Gruppe der Masuren dar, sondern auch belegen die Denkweise des Westmenschen in Bezug auf den anderen, wobei der Westmensch, einen imaginären Osten konstruiert. August Maximilian Grabowski ist ein unbekannter Autor. Auf eine Reise nach Preußen begibt er sich 1844 aus Neugier, deren Befriedigung für ihn ebenso wertvoll sei wie für andere große Geldsummen, obwohl er zugibt, eine geizige Person zu sein. Er ist ohne Zweifel von edler Geburt, politisch interessiert, belesen und wahrscheinlich auch wohlhabend. Seine Aufzeichnungen mit dem Titel Reise nach Preußen veröffentlichte er 1859 auf eigene Kosten in Paris. Grabowski bezeichnet die Masuren zunächst als Preußen, gelegentlich als unsere Preußen oder alte Preußen-Polen, zuletzt als eroberte und umgedrehte Polen. Die Einstellung des Autors gegenüber den Masuren ändert sich während der Reise zunehmend ins Negative. Zu Beginn seiner Reise betrachtet er Masuren als ein Volk, das zwar grobian, jedoch in der Lage ist, den Germanismus seit 4 Jahrhunderten von seiner Schwelle abzuweisen. Im Schlussabschnitt sieht er die Masuren als wenig verstehend über sich selbst, als die, die sich den deutschen Herren angleichen und die nur an der Vermehrung ihres Vermögens sowie an Fleisch und Bier interessiert sind. Der Deutsche regiert, der Pole hört zu, schreibt Grabowski. Wie andere Zeitgenossen hält er die masurische Sprache für minderwertig und fehlerhaft. Er weist den Masuren Sünden gegen die polnische Sprache nach und empfiehlt ihnen, die korrekte Sprache zu lernen. Grabowski bemerkt, dass die Verwendung des masurischen Dialekts den Menschen auf einer niedrigeren Stufe der preußischen Gesellschaftshierarchie positioniert. Die aufstrebenden Masuren möchten daher wie Deutsche aussehen. Zitat: Die Frauen haben dort besonders die deutsche Tracht angenommen. Jeder, die nicht spricht, wird unweigerlich von einem Polen als Schwäbin bezeichnet. Öffnet sie jedoch den Mund und nennt ihren Namen, wirst du feststellen, dass sie Polin ist, denn jeder spricht ausschließlich Polnisch und trägt Namen mit der Endung ski oder ski. Die Männer erscheinen auch äußerlich als Deutsche, jedoch nicht so stark wie die Frauen. In ihren Häusern ist es das Gleiche wie in den Häusern der Bauern anderer polnischer Länder, mit dem Unterschied, dass man weit mehr Ordnung, Sauberkeit und Wohlstand sieht. Grabowski hat auch eigene Vorstellungen über den europäischen Westen und den europäischen Osten, die direkt in das spätere Konzept des Orientalismus hineinspielen. Also dieses Zitat wurde dann in der Nachkriegszeit zensiert. Es gibt eine verborgene Kraft im Westen Europas, die wie der Wind, der den Müll wegfegt, die Menschen in Richtung Osten drängt, während sie umgekehrt wie ein geistiger Magnet die Gedanken zu sich zieht und den Osten dazu bringt, alles zu lieben, was der Westen hervorbringt. In der Tat, warum wird Lothringen französisch? Warum so viele Slawen, sogar Polen? Warum werden sie deutsch? Warum verändern andere Völker ihre Identität jeweils zum Vorteil ihres westlichen Nachbarn? Grabowski betrachtet die Germanisierung als ein Teil eines globalen Trends, nachdem die Polen sich germanisieren, während die Deutschen nicht slawisch werden. Seiner Meinung nach ist der Westen attraktiver als der Osten und die Germanisierung ist eine Konsequenz eines uralten Prozesses. Also das zweite Werk zur Kunde Masurens. Salomo Oldenberg ist auch der Autor eines einzigen Werkes, das ursprünglich als interner Bericht für die Hierarchen der evangelischen Kirche über den Zustand des Glaubens in Ostpreußen gedacht war. Unerwartet für den Autor selbst entwickelte sich der handschriftlich verfasste Bericht mit dem Titel Zur Kunde Masurens auf über 100 Seiten und wurde zu einem außergewöhnlichen Zeugnis des Kulturkontakts. Oldenberg schreibt ehrlich für einen geschlossenen Kreis von Lesern ohne den Filter politischer Korrektheit. Obwohl er die polnische Sprache nicht beherrscht und auf einen Übersetzer angewiesen ist, beginnt er seine Beschreibung mit Bemerkungen zur Sprache. Der allmähliche Verlust des Dialekts ist für Oldenberg eine natürliche Folge der Assimilation einer sprachlichen Minderheit im preußischen Staat. Der Dialekt hat nach Oldenberg nur begrenzte Möglichkeiten, sich an die modernisierende Welt anzupassen, die in der Zeit des Vormärz neue bürgerliche Phänomene hervorbrachte, wie zum Beispiel Wahlen, Selbstbestimmung, Verfassung. Der masurische Dialekt, der keinen Kontakt zur lebendigen polnischen Sprache mehr hat, kennt diese Bezeichnungen nicht und versteinert, was sich auf die politischen Horizonte seiner Sprecher auswirkt. Zitat: Politische Dinge dem Masuren begreiflich zu machen, ist es so gut wie unmöglich, weil die rechten Worte dazu absolut fehlen. Bei Gelegenheit von Wahlen wurden hier und dort demokratische Flugblätter in masurischer Sprache unter das Volk gestreut. Sie blieben aber völlig wirkungslos, weil sie unverständlich waren. Der Masur will von nichts wissen als von seinem König, schon deshalb, weil er nur für ihn ein Wort hat. Für Kammer, Volksvertretung, Verfassung und so weiter hat er keines. Seine Sprache macht ihn zum Absolutisten. Der deutsche Geistliche Oldenberg ist sich der Gefahren bewusst, die mit dem Verlust der Vätersprache und der unzureichenden Aneignung der neuen Sprache einhergehen. Er erlebte in einer Grundschule, wie masurische Kinder Gleichnisse aus dem Neuen Testament auswendig vortrugen, jedoch nicht in der Lage waren, eine auf Deutsch gestellte Frage zu beantworten, da sie die Sprache nicht verstanden. Zitat: Die Schule produziert eine Generation, die weder Deutsch noch Polnisch zu sprechen und zu verstehen vermag. So verdeutschte oder halb verdeutschte Kinder sind stumpf. Oft bringt man es glücklich so weit, dass der Bube und das Mädchen sich nicht mehr mit Vater und Mutter zu verständigen vermag und auch für die Zukunft das Verständnis sowohl der deutschen als auch der polnischen Predigt ihm unmöglich macht. Die Lehrer erreichen ihre Resultate durch nichts anderes als durch Auswendiglernen. Die armen masurischen Dirnen und Jungen können weder Deutsch noch Polnisch richtig schreiben. In allen Stücken fehlt auch das nötigste Maß von Denken und Einsicht. Sie sind ganz außerstande, ein Buch, das auch nur die mäßigsten Ansprüche macht, zu verstehen. In den notwendigsten Gegenden fehlt ihnen die Kenntnis. Das Geringe, was sie haben, haben sie auswendig gelernt. Die sprachliche Eigenständigkeit steht in Zusammenhang mit mangelnden Bildungserfolgen, was laut Oldenberg die Masuren auf einer niedrigen Stufe der preußischen Gesellschaft hält. Gegenüber dieser sozialen Gruppe zeigt Oldenberg zunehmend Empathie, behält jedoch eine kritische Distanz zum Masuren, der, Zitat, alles Wertvolle und Wichtige, wovon er abhängig war, dem Deutschen verdankte. Zitat Ende. Der Masure erkenne, so Oldenberg, dass er diesem Überlegenheitsgefühl nicht gerecht wird. Germanisierung ist somit eng mit kultureller Überlegenheit verknüpft und der Notwendigkeit, dieses Volk an die Lebensbedingungen im preußischen Staat anzupassen, da der Masure diese Bedingungen nicht erfüllt. Spuren der Orientalisierung der Masuren finden sich übrigens nicht nur in den hier analysierten Reiseberichten, sondern auch in anderen Texten aus dieser Zeit. Dieser Landesstrich wird im Allgemeinen für das preußische Sibirien gehalten, schreibt ein masurischer Geistlicher in einem offenen Brief an den König. Und dessen Bewohner werden zum größten Teil auf gleicher Bildungsstufe mit den Kalmucken, Tataren, Panduren und Kroaten stehend gehalten. In Reportagen, die 1882 in der Dziennik Poznański veröffentlicht wurden, werden die Masuren mit den zeitgenössischen Indianern verglichen, die von neuen Siedlern verdrängt und kulturell ausgerottet werden. Zusammenfassung. Die Darstellung des masurischen Volkes in beiden oben analysierten Texten ist ein kulturelles Produkt. Trotz unterschiedlicher nationaler Perspektiven betrachten beide Autoren die Masuren als ein Exotikum. Sie reisten nach Ostpreußen, um diese eigenartige Menschengruppe zu erforschen. Für sie sind die Masuren Objekte der Fürsorge, die einer Intervention bedürfen. Der Pole sieht in ihnen das Opfer der Germanisierung, Menschen ohne Identität, die selbst nicht wissen, wer sie sind, während der Deutsche sie als Objekte betrachtet, die durch Germanisierung zivilisiert werden müssen. Die Position beider Autoren gegenüber den Masuren ist kritisch. Sie halten deren Sprache für fehlerhaft und ihre Kultur für weniger entwickelt, behandeln sie paternalistisch und diskriminierend. Grabowski sieht die Germanisierung als einen alten Globalisierungsprozess, den er mit Kolonialisierung gleichsetzt. Der Verlust der eigenen Identität ist eine Konsequenz des sozialen Aufstiegs. Tatsächlich haben die Masuren im Gegensatz zu den Kaschuben oder Schlesiern ihre Eigenart zugunsten oder Eigenständigkeit zugunsten des Deutschtums verloren. Auch in den Familiengeschichten zeigt sich das Verdrängen des polnischen Elements als das weniger attraktive. Im Kontext der zitierten Werke ist die Aussage, wo sich aufhört die Kultur, da beginnt sich der Masur, nicht nur mit Vorurteilen gegenüber dieser sozialen Gruppe verbunden, sondern auch mit der Definition des deutschen Kulturraums, der dort endet, wo der Westen, verstanden als höhere Kultur, auf den imaginierten Osten trifft, personifiziert durch den noch nicht vollständig deutschen Masuren. Vielen Dank für Ihre Aufmerksamkeit.
Thank you very much. Our second speaker is Dr. Mateusz Maleszka. He is a law scholar and holds a PhD from history from University Mikołaja Kopernika in the post-Prussian city of Toruń. He was a junior fellow at Institute in Marburg and now works for Instytut Pamięci Narodowej in Bydgoszcz. Today, Today he will be talking about the theory of Restgermanen as a basis for German territorial or political claims in the period of 1890 to 1945. Dr. Maleszka, we are looking forward.
Thank you for your introduction. I should start with a joke, but I didn't prepare one. I only hope that, that some of these theories could be considered as such. So, okay. A Polish historian, Marceli Handelsman, observed before the outbreak of the Second World War that a characteristic feature of German expansion, at least since the end of the 18th century, is that the drive for a conquest is accompanied by a corresponding scientific justification. In my presentation, I aim to focus on the arguments repeatedly raised by German megalomaniacs, which refer to the findings of historical science. I will present both some conclusions drawn by historians from Wilhelminian era, Weimar Republic, and the Third Reich, as well the implication of their assumption in the practice of ethnic policies in Eastern Europe. In the United Germany after 1871, a belief prevailed among certain segments of both society and the academic community that the country's borders were not sufficient for the German nation. Among some intellectual circles, the ideas of pan-Germanism gained popularity. This idea assumed that new German state borders should encompass territorial inhabited by the ancestors of contemporary Germans. The borders of Germany were supposed to include not only their original homeland, but also territories that had been inhabited in the past by the Germanic people. For this reason, there was a search for Proto-Germanic cradle, which was located in various places. For example, Karpenka placed it in southern Jutland, while Gustav Kosina, he was from a Masur, so I should mention that. Initially located, Proto-Germanic cradle in northern Germany in southern Scandinavia, and later on the southern coast of Baltic Sea and in his native East Prussia. Some scholars advance even more far-reaching theories. For example, Theodor Posze placed a cradle of entire white race farther east in the marshes of Polesia, while Hermann Brunhofer situated the cradle of all Indo-Germans or Indo-Europeans between northern Germany and Black Sea steppes. Much of territory identified as ancient homeland at the turn of 19th and 20th centuries was inhabited not only by Germans, but also by other nationalities, or lay at south borders of German Empire. Explanation for this situation were sought in the great historical event, Great Migration or Völkerwanderung. As a result of mass population movements, Germanic tribes such as Goths, Lombards, and Vandals left their original homelands and settled in the ruins of Roman Empire. According to some scholars, not all members of these tribes participated in Great Migration. Some Germanic people were believed to have remained in their original settlement or split off the main group to settle somewhere along migration road. The Goths and Vandals were particular interest to researchers, as the migration road through Europe stretched from southern Scandinavia through Vistula region, Ukraine, Crimea, Balkans, to the Italy and Spain, and in case of Vandals, even northern Africa. In all of these areas, they were thought to have left behind some relic communities known as Remanen German or Restgermanen. The presence of these communities in regions such as Poland, Ukraine, and Balkans, as demonstrated by historians, became basis of specific planning during First and Second World War. Okay, so first I will talk about this type of relic communities in Poland. The idea that some people in Poland are descendants of the Goths dates back to the turn of 19th and 20th century, when German physician and ethnologist Georg Buschan, in his work Germanen und Slawen, eine archäologisch-anthropologische Studie, proposed that Vistula and other river communities of Germanic people left behind during the Great Migration had intermingled with Slavs. As a result, Buschan suggests that entire Western Slavic population constituted a racial mixed people. According to subsequent research, the areas of Poland where Gothic presence was particularly evident were the Pomeralia, Pomorze, or West Preußen, Kurpie Forest, and Podhale. Historical accounts indicate that Goths originated from a land called Skanza, which modern historians locate in central Sweden or Gotland, and from there were said to have journeyed in 3 ships led by their chiefman Beric to the new homeland called Gothic Skanza. A key example of research into this theory is work of the one of most important German medievalists, Erich Kaiser. I'm sorry. It's funny to lost sometimes with this device. In his why this theory itself do not provoke much controversy, as is accepted somehow by the most archaeologists today. Kaiser, who was from Gdańsk, gave this theory overtly nationalistic connotation. In his 1939 work, Geschichte des deutschen Wisselandes, Kaiser identified 3 periods during the Pomorze region, or Pomorze, Pomeralia, West Preußen was under German rule. The first was ancient history, where the area was was inhabited by Goths and Vandals who were said to possess distinct racial traits. The subsequent periods were the rule of Teutonic Order and Prussia after 1772. The key feature of first period, according to Kaiser, was the lasting impact of the Goths. Even though most Germanic tribes left the region during migration period, Kaiser argued that the area still inherently belonged to Germany. The small community of Goths comprised of members of the Nordic race that remained after the migration preserved their racial traits. Even the arrival of Slavs and establishment of rule over Gdańsk by Pomeranian dukes did not erase Germanic traces from the region. However, it did significantly alter the racial dynamics. First, the region saw the influx of Slavic masses, and the descendants of original Germanic tribes became a minority. Second, there was a division between power and racial structures. The ruling Pomeranian Slavic dukes represented the inferior racial type compared to descendants of the Goths. Therefore, in Kaiser's view, it was biological necessity for this Gothic homeland to return under German control. During Second World War, Kaiser was actively involved in cultural and academic life of Reichsgau-Danzig West Preußen. He corresponded with Heinrich Himmler, advised Gauleiter, and sat on commission responsible for decolonization of Polish place names. Kaiser was also originator of an idea to rename Gdynia to Gottenhafen, port of the gods. Gdańsk and the Pomerania region were not only areas where remnants of Gothic communities were sought. German researchers were also interested in ethnographic groups such as Kurpie and Gorale, Highlanders from Podhale. In his book Schicksal der Polen, Rasse, Volkscharakter, Stammesart, Hans Joachim Beyer include a short chapter, Die Kurpe, Reste der Goten, were driving on early finding of both Polish authors and such ethnographers, such as ethnographer Adam Hednik and anthropologist Jan Czekanowski, and German scholars like medievalist Kult Forstreut and anthropologist Ilse Świdecki. He presented his own evaluation of the race and origin of Kurpie. According to Beyer, the people of Kurpie region exhibited an East European racial type with clear Nordic blood influence. The origin, he argued, was twofold. Northern part of region was closely related to Nordic Jotwingians, Jatwingowie in Polish. I do not know how it pronounced in Lithuanian, but whose connection with Germanic tribes needed further study, while southern part of Kurpie were descendants from Gothic travelers moving southward. Beyer attributed the fighting spirit of Kurpie soldiers who historically battled Swedes and Russians to the presence of Nordic blood. The Kurpie, with the neatness and customs, were considered closer to Masurian than to the Poles from Mazovia. In Beyer's view, the Kurpie were Polish tribe with clear traces of Germanic influence and should be treated differently from other Polish tribes. While Beyer viewed Kurpie as one of Polish tribes, he regarded the Górale, Highlanders of Podhale, as completely separate nation. He was not alone in this view. Others, including Dr. Anton Plygl and militarist propagandist Walter Blachetta, shared this perspective. Plygl focused on the racial characteristics of Podhale Highlanders, arguing that they represent Dinaric racial type with Nordic influence, similar to the population of Bavaria or Tyrol. This led to an obvious conclusion. The Gorale were of non-Polish origins. They were thought to be descendants either from Vlachs, which is quite possible, German colonies from 12th and 13th century, or directly from the Goths. In Polish literature, it is often mentioned that Włodzimierz Antonowicz research from the 1920s highlighted some similarities between Gothic and Górale jewelry, and that formed the basis of the German thesis about Gothic origin of Tatra Highlanders. I believe this is wrong. The hypothesis of Gothic origin of Górale is much older. In Austria-Hungary and later in Germany and United States, they were recognized as distinct ethnic group. Mayer's Conversation Lexicon from 1885 and Dictionary of Races and People from 1911 emphasized that significant separation Górale from other Polish-speaking group. In Mayer's Conversation Lexicon, the Górale were explicitly described as Germanic population that had undergone Slavicization. Ludwik Gumplowicz, a professor at the University of Graz, made this claim in his work Chorwaci I Serbowie Studium Socjologiczne, asserting that Gothic communities inhabited the slopes of Tatra mountains. These ideas were consciously referenced by Hans Frank, the general governor of general government during the Second World War, when he initiated the Goralen Folk campaign. This initiative aimed to impose so-called Goralen nationality on the local population, replacing Polish identity and eventually leading to their Germanization. Although there have been recent studies in Poland examining the curse of this largely ineffective campaign. The ideological foundation of these efforts have yet to be thoroughly researched. However, after all, Poland was not only the only area where the Goths had once lived and where Germanists press their territorial claims. Goths, led by Hermanric, arrived on Black Sea steppes. According to medieval accounts, they established vast kingdom that fell under onslaughts of the Huns. Unable to defend their lands, most of the Goths migrated westward, seeking protection under Eastern and Western Roman empires. However, few communities submitted to the Huns and later to Byzantium, surviving in Crimea Peninsula until Khazar conquest in the 8th century. The last traces of people identifying themselves as Goths in the region date back to the 18th century. The existence of Germanic settlements so far east naturally piqued the interest of German scholars. As early as 1881, Austrian of Czech descent Wilhelm Tomaszek, in his work Goten in Tauren, not only compiled Gothic language dictionary, but also documented the history of the Goths on the Crimean Peninsula, particularly emphasizing the survival of communities after fall of their statehood. His research was continued by ethnographer Richard Lewe, who published book Die Restgermanen am Schwarzen Meer, eine ethnologische Untersuchung. This work claimed that ancient Germans left a lasting impact of the customs of Crimean and Central Ukrainian communities. As is easy to imagine, by the late 19th century, among Pan-Germanists, there were already emerging concepts to incorporating Crimea back into their homelands. One of the figures interested in making Crimea a Germanic colony was General Erich Ludendorff. The opportunity to pressure to this plan arose during First World War, when groups of Tatar nationalists supported by Ottoman Turkey proclaimed Crimean Tatar Republic. The Germans did not recognize this ethnic entity, and given that Muslims constituted only 13% of population, according to the census, they initiated their own action to dominate the peninsula. General Ludendorff believed that establishment of state dominated by local Black Sea Germans and drawing from Gothic tradition would be first step toward realizing his plan. Diplomatic problems with Ukrainian separatists and Turkey delayed the implementation of his intention. The concept of turning Crimea into a German colony resurfaced during Second World War. Preparations were overseen by General Commissar Alfred Frauenfeld, who sponsored various projects to commemorating the Crimean Goths and planned to resettle South Tyrolians from Italy, who had Ostrogothic and Lombard origins. Drawing on historical precedents, German authors naturally invoked the figure of Hermann Rick, the warlord of the north and ruler of the Gothic kingdom in the modern Ukraine. The scope of, and influence of Hermann Rick kingdom have been subjected to debate among historians both in the past and in today. However, the vision put forth by World War II era scholars such as Karl Engel in his article Die ostgermanischen Stamme in Ostdeutschland, die gothische Ostseeherrschaft und das Gotenreich in Osteuropa, in Work Deutsche Ostforschung, Ergebnisse und Aufgaben seit dem Ersten Weltkrieg was downright grandiose. According to these scholars, Hermann Rick kingdoms was said to have controlled all territory from the Baltic Sea to Black Sea and far into East, aligning closely with the military ambition of the Third Reich. Yet, this was not the end of political and territorial aspiration of Nazi elite. Fleeing from the Huns, the Goths ventured into Balkan Peninsula, leaving lasting impact on nearly every state in the region. In 1932, the journal Manus, edited but after mentioned Gustav Kosina, published an article by Romanian Germanist Constantin Diculescu titled Die Vandalen und die Goten in Ungarn in Rumänien. According to Diculescu, Germanic tribes of the Vandals and Visigoths played the role of cultural bearers or Kulturträger in these territories. The other scholars of the era went even further. Austrian Johann Thomas Peisker, originally from Czech town Oprany, hypothesized that elites of Slavic states originated from Germany or from other more developed peoples. Other authors supported this idea. Austrian scholars such as Józef Strzygowski, who hailed from Galicia, and Austro-Slovenian author Ludomir Hauptmann debated whether Goths or Sarmatian had the main influence on the ethnic origins of the Croats. However, previously mentioned Ludwig Gumplowicz had no doubts in this regard. He convinced not only Goths inhabited northern slopes of Tatra mountains, but also that from this area, bands of warriors set out to conquer Slavic population in the Balkans, thus laying foundation for the statehood of the Serb and Croats. However, Gumplowicz, a critic of Germanization policy, could not have foreseen the consequence of his theory would have on the megalomania of both German and Croatian nationalists. In 1935, the German journal Nordische Welt published an article by Cherubin Segwicz, in which the Croatian author argued that Pan-Slavism falsely imposed Slavic identity on the Croats, while in fact they were a people of Germanic origin. The name Horvat, according to Segwicz, derived from Germanic Hrot Gotons, which has composed of two elements, the Gothic word Gutano, meaning brave or valiant, and Hroto, meaning victory. So the honorable Croats were to be contrasted with Serb with slave mentality. The Croats had adopted Slavic language only because many Slavs sought to break away from their Slavic roots, and Croats accepted them, thus forming a united people. As bizarre as this theory may sound, the idea, it became an ideological foundation of the independent state of Croatia, or NDH. Its leader, Poglavnik Ante Pavelić, not only privately shared this belief, but also assumed that shared ancestry with the Germans was a guarantee of German-Croatian alliance. For this reason, the claims that Croats' Gothic origin were included in his work Die Kroatische Frage. Germany policy favoring the Croats on the expense of other Slavic groups, including Slovens and Serbs, and even Slovens who had been exposed to German influence is well known. The independent state of Croatia, the Waffen-SS formation made up of Bosniaks, who Germans refer as Muslim Croats, are merely the most striking exemplars of this collaboration, whose foundation was the supposed descent of the Croats from the Germanic tribes. The Visigoths and Ostrogoth tribes, which traveled all Europe from the Baltic to the Mediterranean and Black Sea and from the Dnieper to Spain, left lasting impact on the continent history. This fact, however, has been subject to various reinterpretations. The territories once inhabited by Goths in ancient times were later sought for domination, either directly through the creation of colonies or the incorporation of these areas, or indirectly by supporting establishment of political regimes favorable to Germany. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much for drawing our attention to this dead end of ethnology research. The next speaker will be Benedikt Putz, who was an exchange student at Georgetown University, DC, before earning his BA from Sciences Po in Paris in political and social sciences. He is now a master student in East European Studies at Freie Universität Berlin and a research assistant to the Foundation Memorial of the Murdered Jews of Europe. He will be speaking about colonial narratives and continuities in the Weimar Republic in the context of the struggle for Upper Silesia in the years 1919-1921. So, the floor is yours.
All right. Hello and welcome to my presentation on colonial narratives and continuities in Weimar Germany in the context of the struggle for Upper Silesia. Unfortunately, I need to disappoint you again because I also didn't prepare a joke. But I would like to compensate you by answering to the main question that was mentioned in the conference booklet, which is how can postcolonial and decolonial approaches dismantle prevailing stereotypes and address knowledge gaps as well as absences in German Erinnerungskultur. So I will try to give some answers to these questions in my presentation. So first, I would like to set the context for my presentation and explain why the topic matters for both academic research and collective memory, or Erinnerungskultur, if we want to use the German term again. So what we can see here is 3 images depicting historically significant events. And what all 3 events of them have in common is exactly a bunch of European rulers talking about how to best split up vast spaces of territory among them. And what we can also see is that they basically make no difference between Poland, China, or the African continent. And the other contextual element I want to give here is 2 images of Warsaw under German occupation in World War II. On the left, you can see the Pabst plan, which was created in 1940, and which aimed at transforming Warsaw into a German city of only 300,000 inhabitants. So it was part of the Lebensraum im Osten project of the Nazis. Now, the Pabst plan was never realized, but on the right, you can see a photograph of destroyed Warsaw in 1945, an image which I am sure you're all familiar with. Now, Upper Silesia was neither part of those territories affected by the partitions of Poland. It had already belonged to Prussia before, nor was it part of the general government during World War II, as it was annexed immediately to the German Reich. However, and this is now where I'm going to tell you why it is important to look at Upper Silesia in the early interwar period, is that, in my opinion, there is a knowledge gap concerning the period between the expansionist regimes of Prussia and the German Empire on the one hand, and the Lebensraum ideology of the Nazis on the other. And because of this, I believe that research could benefit substantially from focusing more on the periphery and semi-periphery of empires in so-called perceived transitional periods. And to illustrate this point, just take a look at the propaganda poster on the right. It will feature again later in my presentation, but what you can see here is that basically, according to this poster, which was used in the prelude of the plebiscite in Upper Silesia, is that according to this German propaganda, Poland equals to death. So that doesn't look like a particularly peaceful transitional period to me. And here's some of the literature I consulted for my research. I know that you probably can't really read it anyway, and I don't really want to waste a lot of time on it. But if you're interested in having a more comprehensive bibliography, you can just approach me in one of the breaks later on. But what I would like to briefly mention is that for a long period of time in Germany, mostly so-called Landsmannschaften or Vertriebenenverbände actually cared about the Upper Silesian experience. And for a long period, this was completely neglected in German collective memory. So there's a lot more research in the Anglo-Saxon world and in Poland than in Germany on this topic. And I would also like to briefly state the research objectives for my research on this topic. So first, I wanted to identify Weimar Germany's self-image and the othering of Poland in the context of the struggles for Upper Silesia. Second, I would like to analyze the influences of colonial discourses and narratives on Weimar German public opinion and politics regarding the Second Polish Republic. And the third goal was to explain discontinuities between the German Empire and Nazi Germany. So how did I proceed to answer the questions that arise from these objectives? My intention was to use sources which are emblematic for the dominant narratives of the time. And I identified Reichstag speeches as well as posters as tools of mass propaganda to be particularly useful in this context. So for anyone interested, there is a website which perfectly summarizes all protocols of Reichstag debates on the Upper Silesian question. And what was quite amusing to me is that I used to work at the German Bundestag until recently, and what I found quite interesting is that still 100 years later, the Bundestag still uses the exact same layout for the protocols as 100 years ago. So if you ever wonder about German bureaucracy again, this might also be interesting to consider. So I identified 5 elements which were prevalent in these Reichstag debates on the Upper Silesian question. First, Poland was usually portrayed as the sole aggressor for the violence in Upper Silesia. Second, expressions of solidarity with ethnic Germans in Upper Silesia were almost present in every speech. Third, there were debates about support for the Freikorps, so some paramilitary groups active in Upper Silesia. And this was also a contested point because not all parties did support this measure, while usually they agreed on almost all measures regarding Upper Silesia. The fourth point, which I identified, were denunciations of the actions of the Allies. And that was also quite interesting to me because many Reichstag speakers actually used international law and the Versailles Treaty to justify their negative views on the actions of the Allies, because they believed that what they did in Upper Silesia was actually in breach of the Versailles Treaty and international law. And the fifth point was the very interesting use of language. So this reached from warlike language and very cruel terms to some, in some ways, also pathetic and very emotional speeches. For example, there was one deputy from the Zentrumspartei, so the Catholic party, and he described how a loss of Upper Silesia for the German Empire meant that one star would decline from the beautiful night sky, and this was such a tragedy to him. And I also took a look at propaganda posters for the 1921 plebiscite. Again, for those interested, most of them can be found in the collections of the Oberschlesisches Landesmuseum in Ratingen, the Schlesisches Museum in Görlitz, the Museum Śląska Opolskiego in Opole, the Museum Powstań Śląskich in Świętochłowice, and the Museum Śląskie in Katowice. So here it is important to mention that both Poland and Germany used nationalist propaganda in the prelude of the plebiscite. However, there was a major imbalance of power, which on quite a few posters took the form of a dynamic between colonizer and colonized. So what you can see here, and again, there is the poster of Poland, which is portrayed as deaf. And I want you to take a look at the background of the poster, where you can see some huts depicting a Polish village, apparently. And that doesn't really look like what Polish villages usually look like at the time. It looks more like what you could find in depictions of villages in African colonies. And on the left, you can also see that Poland, and that was very present on a lot of posters, is that Poland was usually described, or Poles more precisely, were described as brutes and savages. In this case, Poland is the wolf attacking the innocent German girl. And there were a lot of posters like this, so these are only two examples. So, what are the outcomes of my analysis of Weimar German behavior in Upper Silesia through the framework of post-colonial theory? So first and foremost, the Upper Silesian case raises questions for the limits of post-colonial theory in Central and Eastern Europe. So I only have 3 points listed here, but this list could go on. But I think what is very interesting is that, for example, when we look at the Weimar German rhetoric depicting Poles as uncivilized savages, was this only a form of expression of nationalist propaganda, or was it actually a colonial or post-colonial depiction of Poles? At the same time, Poland not being considered as a territory with a sovereign people living in there, was this only a simple disdain for Poland and Poles, or was it a racist and anti-Slavic pattern of thought? And the third point, which is that all parties of the Weimar Republic actually with the exception of the communists, because they thought that at some point all workers in Upper Silesia would join anyway, supported a revisionist policy towards Poland. And the question which is interesting here is that to what extent did Weimar Germany want to realize post-colonial ambitions in East Central Europe? So these are, I think, some questions which can be raised here and which future research needs to answer. So now what are the implications of this for future research? And this is probably the most important part here at this conference, dedicated to a theoretical framework which has not been traditionally applied to Central and Eastern Europe. I think that coming back to what I mentioned earlier, I believe that understanding the Upper Silesian case is essential for understanding the continuity between the German Empire and Nazi Germany. I think that looking at the struggles in Upper Silesia during the early interwar period provides interesting and important knowledge on both the German Empire and Nazi Germany, but also, of course, the interwar period and the continuity of such colonial thoughts or post-colonial thoughts and violence. So, in the end, I want to make the case that from looking at such cases of regional violence in so-called transitional periods, there could be some important theory which could be built through an inductive method. And this not only applies to the Upper Silesian case, this also applies to other regional conflicts during the interwar period, like, for example, as it was the case for Fiume between Italy and Croatia, or as it was mentioned earlier, Eastern Prussia, or many other regional conflicts during this period, which are often overlooked. So first, I think that we should undertake comprehensive studies of regional conflicts in the imperial periphery and semi-periphery, because these are like the traditional focus, of course, in East European studies, as especially Franziska Davis mentioned yesterday, is traditionally on Russia and Germany and what they did in this region. So looking at the semi-periphery and periphery even more might be very beneficial. Also, I think that we should use comparative methods to then understand broader trends in so-called transitional periods. And in the end, write entangled histories of these regional conflicts. So my argument would be that we can learn from the Upper Silesian case that the traditional and still dominant focus on the imperial centers at events which marked them not only provides an incomplete picture of the past, but also reinforce post-colonial views in our collective memory today. So that was my case for applying post-colonial theory to Upper Silesia. Thank you.
Thank you for this illuminating talk. May I invite all three speakers to the front and ask you to share one microphone so that I can pass over the microphone to those asking questions. I open the floor for discussion. Yeah.
Thank you. I got a question for Dr. Maleszka about this topic of like the ethnic ideologies, and what do you think? Was it like that the first thing? I was taught about the Górale that they were like part of the political advantage for the Nazis. And was it like the first thing was to identify them as good for the politics, or the first thing was to identify them as like the idea, was it like the ideological sympathies were first, and then they just find the advantage in that?
It's interesting questions, thank you. I believe that the idea that Górale were descendants of gods is much older than Nazi ideology itself. And I said that some mentions that Górale are separate ethnicity are from late 19th century. But of course, it was very useful idea for the Nazi. They just picked some ideas that were before. I hope that this is answer good enough for you.
Okay, so
I believe that the idea was first, and Nazis just picked, like in buffet, they picked the one which they needed at the moment.
The best for political plans. Okay.
The same was in case Crimea. The same was in Croatia. Why plenty people in plenty of people of German descent in Croatia or Croatian Germanophiles choose Gothic theory instead of alternative Slavic origin theory or Sarmatian origin theory. It's the idea was from. Actually, it's much older because there are some chronicles accounts from Middle Ages that Croatians are descendants of the gods, but what that came in the back in the early 20th century and during Second World War, because this idea was more useful than other ones. So.
Okay, thank you.
I'll have a question to Benedikt. So it's a very specific question, but I was thinking about those two propaganda posters, and one of them you discussed this village in the background, but I also noticed there's how do you call it, the Wappen, the Polish Wappen, right, with the eagle, and there's a crown over it, and the crown is big, is overly big. As far as I researched in the meantime, because I find it interesting, that's not the correct thing. Like, it didn't look like this, and I was thinking whether it wasn't an allegory of a despotism of a kingdom, because at the time there was like this regency council, as you probably know, in Poland, right? So it was still not clear if there will be a king or a monarchy or a democracy. Have you thought about like if there's a meaning behind this as well?
Yeah, unfortunately, I think I have to disappoint you, which is, of course, not very satisfying, but I think I really don't know the answer to this. I would probably, if I had to give an answer, I would just say that it is one of these usual exaggerations that we can find in such graphics, and that there's no particularly meaning behind it. But of course, I'm not 100% sure. If you want to, we can talk about it during one of the breaks and philosophize about it.
Yes, and I have a question for Anna Damięcka. And the concept of Orientalism is, of course, a very large concept, and I was curious if in any of your research on the particular group you saw evidence of Orientalism taking place towards other minorities that were inhabiting Masuren at that time that you're considering.
So I think the Masuren ethnic group was the only group that was considered as the less attractive in East Prussia. So it was natural a way to orientalize them. Of course, East Prussia was a multi-ethnic country, but Masurians who lived at the border to Poland and where this element that was not sure in German perspective and should be educated and Germanized were natural object to be colonized.
Thank you very much.
I have a follow-up question about the notion of Orientalism in the case of Masurians. Wondering whether Larry Wolff's concept of demi-Orientalization would not be better for describing such a hybrid phenomenon as the Masurians, who are othered from two sides. It's a bilateral othering, which goes back to their hybrid status. And that's why I'm wondering whether it is not more about class and muteness in the understanding of Gayatri Spivak. As we heard from your sources, the Masurians are considered non-speaking, non-gifted with language. And that's probably due to education and not to physiological ability not to speak, as Gayatri Spivak points out. So is it not a kind of demi-classization if I combine now Larry Wolff and Gayatri Spivak for this peculiar case of bilaterally othered hybrid group?
Yes, it's very interesting, your comment. Of course, Masurians, it is a hybrid identity, and they were able to speak, but they were considered not to be able to speak. So they tried to give up this hybrid identity, and interviews that I make with ancestors, some people have this PTSD syndrome after they learned about the history of their family and this double identity that they couldn't, they cannot so, Wahrnehmung.
Perceive.
Yeah, perceive. So, of course, the othering on both sides is maybe the it's maybe why this ethnic group disappeared, because it's the only one ethnic group between Poles and Germans, unlike Kashubians and Silesians, Upper Silesians. They survived, and the Masurians not. So maybe this semi-postcolonial, so postcolonialism and othering on both sides was responsible for the situation today.
Okay, so I've got one question to Mateusz and I've got one question to Benedikt. So, doing this kind of research, I'm sure you're aware about works of Professor Górny. And it's very interesting what you are talking about post-colonialism and post-colonial approach towards different geographical ideas is very often about the subtle or not that subtle power heritages and continuities. So as far as I know, based mostly on the works of Professor Górny, how those continuities, analogies of instrumental usage of ethnography and other discipline of science work in Poland, I'm completely unaware about the state of affairs in Germany. So if you can elaborate a little bit about how it exists in German discourse today. I mean, whether those guys are still somehow in some circles on the agenda or not really. So that's the question to you. And the question to Benedikt. I got like a theoretical and methodological doubt about applying post-colonial approach towards Upper Silesia because of the very simple reason. Upper Silesia was very highly developed, industrialized area, which was important politically on the very basic level for both Germany and Poland, and that's what the fight was about including highly industrialized important area into the territory of the state. So how the post-colonial approach, which very often talks about economic exploitation, about the usage of the land for the benefit of the center, can be combined with this highly industrialized area. So that's my question. Thank you. And sorry for talking that long.
All right, so I'll start. I think what I need to make more precise again is that I did not want to make the case for applying post-colonial theory to the territory of Upper Silesia. What I did want to make is to use the Upper Silesian case to analyze the relationship between Germany and Poland during that time. So that means that there were post-colonial patterns of thought, in my opinion, in Germany concerning Poland. And in the context of the plebiscite in Upper Silesia, these patterns of thought became prevalent in German propaganda. So I think, we can't really consider Upper Silesia as a territory of being, like some vast spaces of land which are underdeveloped. Of course, that's not the case. So I really wanted to make the case for Germany and German and Polish relations. And I think I also wanted to make another point. I would also say that Upper Silesia is interesting in the way that it is a region, of course, between both lands, which is highly developed, as you said correctly, and the people also, in contrast to the Masuren case, was never really perceived as Oriental or any other thing, neither by Germany nor by Poland. It was seen as an integral part of either the German people or the Polish people. So I think what we can see, and I also tried to highlight this in my presentation here, is the limits of applying post-colonial theory to the territories in Central and Eastern Europe. Because, of course, Upper Silesia is the best example. It was highly developed and multi-ethnic. But at the same time, it can be useful in some way, at least to some extent, in explaining, for example, knowledge gaps, especially in Germany today, regarding why there were continuities of anti-Slavic racist thought and so on and so on. I hope that this is a satisfying answer.
I have two answers. First is that plenty of research made by historians, ethnologists, anthropologists were, according to my knowledge, quite correct. They have access to unique materials. For example, this is impossible to make some body measures or photographic records of the population that today do not exist. So yes, I believe that we can use this, their research, and their research are fine, but we must be aware that there are some ideological problems with interpretation by the researchers from that time. But about traces of the former research in the modern German society. Yes, this is much more complicated because, for example, mentioned Erich Kaiser. After the war, he lived. Of course, he lived Gdańsk or Danzig, and he go to the Western Germany, and became one of the founder of Institut. After the war, of course, he do not write about racial inferiority of Slavs, but he wrote. He made some mention about Slavs that there are some anti-democratic mentality. So And this is why Slavs embraced Soviet Union and Soviet domination. It's the same person. Yes, there are problems, and there are some structural problems with scholars from before, from that period, and you know, I believe that people in Germany are not very proud of that, but but this is only my guess and my intuition. I hope that this answer satisfies you.
Hello? Can you hear me? Or?
You must switch it on.
I see. Hi, my name is Evelina. Thank you for the lecture. It was very interesting. And I have a question to Dr. Mateusz Maleszka, which is the following. It's very interesting what you were talking about Croatia, and I have a question. Since right now there are big debates whether Croatian language can be perceived as a different language, as a language by itself in the post-Yugoslavian context, whereas of course linguists say that it can't be, but political and philosophers say that it can be. And in this context, I'm just wondering if the Gothic aspect and descendant in any way can are like now a prevalent argument in a way of shaping Croatian identity right now?
I believe that there are more qualified persons to speak about Croats than me. For example, Magdalena Reksic from Łódź or Tomasz Jacek Lis from Bydgoszcz. But as I'm aware, Croats want to change the name of their language from Serbo-Croatian to Croatian language. And sometimes this theory and other megalomanian theory, similar to Polish turbolechici, prevailed in Croatian society, and this is sometimes an argument for that. But I have a small anecdote about one assimilated German and how he perceived Croatian language. Houston Stewart Chamberlain, son-in-law of Richard Wagner, and one of most influential German nationalist writer, he can speak only one Slavic language. This language was a language that he called Serb language. His tutor in that language was Ali Čehić, who was Bosniak. And I've seen letter from Chamberlain to Ali Čehić that he even wrote that Bosniaks are the only pure Slavs who speak Serb language. So, yeah, this is much more complicated even from people who from outside. And this was a letter from late 19th century. So. I do not answer for your question, and I added only more complication for for that. Sorry.
Since this is an interdisciplinary panel, I would like to make the papers of Anna and Benedikt speak to each other. Benedikt, what about the hybrid group in the Silesian case? What about the Wasser Polen? Don't they pop up in your political debates, in the propaganda? They do in literature. But is this a limit of your political science approach, maybe?
Thank you. Yeah, I would say in this case we can also see, of course, the limits, and that was also one of my purposes to challenge the concept of postcolonial theory applied here. They didn't pop up a lot in Reichstag debates. I would say almost not at all. And they also didn't really appear in mass propaganda and in the newspapers I looked at. I would say they were, of course, also an important group, and especially in such multi-ethnic regions, such groups are they of course are an argument and a challenge against the concept of national self-determination which was, of course, pushed forward by Wilson and the Versailles Conference, the Paris Peace Conference. And then in Upper Silesia, we, of course, had this problem of mixed groups and different groups which probably did not really fully identify with one nation or the other. And then I would say, yes, such mixed groups or such groups in general which cannot 100% be attributed to one nation really challenge such an analysis of through postcolonial theory, because again, as my purpose was to analyze German-Polish relations, of course you're right, this really challenges this theoretical framework.
As I see, we are perfectly on time, so thanks to the speakers for their ideal time management, and thanks for 3 illuminating papers. Please join me in thanking the speakers for their talks and the committed discussion.